Hi, everybody. It's Greg Daly here from RPM Technik in another one of our series of podcasts. And today I have quite an interesting character with us called Andrew Reardon. So, Andrew's full title when he left his interesting job was Wing Commander Reardon. So, say hi, Andrew.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good stuff. So I have a huge vested interest in this because I think if I didn't go down the route of buying and selling Porsches, I think like most young lads, fighter pilot would have probably been quite high up on the list of jobs we could have done. So when did you join the RAF?
I joined in 1997, straight out of university.
And it's probably a silly question to ask why.
It was a combination of two things, really. It was first, we lived pretty close to Farnborough.
Mm,
So every year we'd either go to a field or a hill and watch the red arrows and all the air displays going on at Farnborough. And then in 1986, when I was kind of 10, 11 years old, Top Gun came out. And
yep.
that was game over, really. From kind of the age of 10 or 11, all I wanted to do was fly fast jets and play beach volleyball.
Yeah, you do have a slight uncanny resemblance to Mr. Cruz actually as well.
Maybe. I've heard that before, but I'm a lot taller, I can assure you.
So when you leave the RAF, do you keep your title of Wing Commander? Because you sometimes see that on sort of headed paper to people, or is that a choice?
It is a choice. So I could have Wing Commander retired. They just put the RETD after it, but not.
Uh,
I'm not quite that pretentious enough or old enough yet, having kind of retired at the age of 38. I didn't think I was quite ready to have retired in my title.
probably a good choice. So where did you do your training? How did it start?
So you start your training at a place called Cranwell in Lincolnshire, which
Hmm.
ironically is the only inland lighthouse in the country, having been a former Navy base.
Yep.
And you do 6 months there, where they kind of teach you how to use a knife, a fork, and a spoon, and how to be an officer.
Yep.
And then once they think you can use a knife, fork, and spoon, you then leave that and you start kind of 3 to 3.5 years of flying training.
Yep. And so what planes do they start you with?
Well, you progress. So you start initially with what we had was called a bulldog, which is just a single propeller thing that you'd expect to see somewhere like Blackbush or any of the kind of small airfields that people do their private pilot's licenses in.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that for a little bit, you move on to something that's got a turbo propeller. So
Hmm.
you're talking double the speed then. So you're going from about 120 miles an hour up to 240 miles an hour, and then you move on to the jets. So you go across to Wales, and then you fly something the Hawk, which is what the Red Arrows fly,
Yep.
and then you're up into kind of the 420 miles an hour, and then it gets super cool if you're selected to do fast jets. And then once you're going down the fast jet route, you've got two options. When I was going through in the late 90s, which is either to go to the fighter variants or to go
Hmm.
to the bomber variants.
And which
The
did you choose?
fighters, I chose the bombers. I mean, the fighters, the Tornado F3 went out of service, I think, a couple of years ago now, and they never
Yep.
had a kind of in service kill per se. Apart
Hmm.
from I think they claimed a weather balloon, but that doesn't really count in anyone's eyes.
Yep.
But again, while I watched most of the footage of the first Gulf War in 1991, when the Tornado GR4 first really cut its teeth in service, and
Mm.
that's really all I wanted to fly. So I just wanted to go off, fly at super low level, kind of 100, 200 feet above the ground, and go and blow stuff up like most young guys do, really.
Yeah. And so going back to your first flight in a jet, can you remember when someone well, did they have keys? Did someone chuck you keys? How does it work?
So the first solo flight in a jet was petrifying, because you literally you're with the pilot, the instructor pilot, and they just
Hmm.
taxi to a kind of the apron they call it, and then they just hop out of the aircraft, and all of a sudden you're in this £4 or £5 million worth of jet,
Yeah.
and you close the canopy down, and everything's very, very quiet because you've not got anyone in the other seat anymore. You can't hear
Yeah.
anyone breathing, and by that point, you're so regimented in the checks you do and all the procedures that you're right, okay, and it kind of just kicks in.
Hmm.
But you can feel yourself shaking, and you can feel your heartbeat going a little bit faster than it normally would, and a little bit more perspiration under the helmet. But
Yeah.
you go off, and then they don't let you go and do anything crazy, so you stay within the vicinity of the airfield and do what you call a circuit. So a few takeoff and landings and bits and pieces, and that's it. It's kind of 15 minutes later, you taxi in and park up, and that's you done. You've flown your first fast jet on your own.
Blimey, that's a pretty cool thing. So we've all learnt to drive, and you have, you curb your first wheel, and you scuff the odd bumper. What's the equivalent with training to be a fast jet pilot? Is there any mishaps you had early on?
Um, did I have? No, you don't. I mean, you're absolutely petrified of hurting these things because rather than kind of tens or hundreds, you're talking hundreds of thousands or millions if you do them any real damage. I suppose the
Mm.
worst thing you can do is land hard.
Okay.
So if you come in, because you're landing at 150, 160 miles an hour, and if you get to a point where the runway is beneath you and you can't see it, and you're kind of pulling on the control stick trying to get down, and if you're a bit overzealous with that, you can really slam it, and worst case you can bounce and then have to take off again.
Yeah. And what's
And
it? I guess it puts quite a lot of stress through the suspension. Or have they got suspension in there somewhere?
yeah, it's hydraulics, so they've got
Mm.
oleos on all the wheels, so exactly that. And yeah, you do that. And then the worst thing is they've got G recorders in there as well. So if you slam it down too much, the engineers download all the data, just like you probably would a Formula One car, and then
Mm.
you get a little tap on your shoulder the next day or later that day saying, "Excuse me, sir, can we have a word? Can you please stop trying to break our jets for us?"
Funny enough, I wrote that down as something to talk about because we've all driven cars and bikes and things like that, and you get to know where the limit of the machine is by usually with the tires or on something on four wheels. How do you get to know where the limit of each plane is? Does it have a sort of a warning of how hard the G's are, and is that pushing the plane too hard? How does it work?
Yeah, exactly that. So they have a G meter, and they also will do something called stall. If you maneuver the jet too hard. So if I cover the kind of the G meter first,
Mm.
the airframe is limited to a certain amount of G. And normally, say it can pull 10 G.
Yeah,
In normal operating conditions, you'd say, right, the limit is 8. So don't pull any more than 8 because that gives you some flexibility then to go up to 10 in
yeah.
training without destroying the jet because the wings fatigue, and after a certain amount of fatigue, you have to retire the aircraft. And if you do
As
that
in
prematurely,
deassemble it and it just sits on a plinth somewhere or something, you mean?
yeah, that's it. It becomes a gate guardian.
Blimey.
So you don't want to do that too often or too prematurely. Um,
Hmm.
so the aircraft will tell you if you're doing that. And then there's systems in there to tell you, especially when you're doing kind of air combat, which is where two aircraft go up and you basically do the kind of the Top Gun thing and try to shoot each other down, um,
Ugh.
hypothetically.
You
That's
must have
that's when
pinched
you get.
yourself at that training point.
That was brilliant. Well, you do it in Cyprus as well. So you've got the
Oh,
sun, you've got kind of the all the blue skies and the sea beneath you. So you really have to fight the urge to not get carried away and just pull that little bit harder to try and shoot the opponent down.
there must
Um,
be a table on the wall at the end of each training session of who's got what.
oh, you do, yeah. I mean, and you get in the debrief as well. So you land the aircraft and everything's recorded. So there's about 5 different angles, and also you
Mm,
air traffic controller recording everything as well, so they can see the aspect of the aircraft and where the guns would be and where the missiles would be pointing. So
yeah.
you think you've got them in the air, and then you land, and you're looking in the debrief, thinking, "Oh dear, I'm going to have to bend the truth slightly here because that looks a little bit naughty." Or because again, just like you have a hard deck, so that you
Okay.
say today we're not going to go beneath 10,000 feet, for example.
Hmm.
because that again, if you're maneuvering the aircraft hard, it's very easy to lose 5,000-6,000 feet without even thinking about it. So
Yeah.
if you say we're not going to go below 10,000 feet unless we're on our way home or on our way there. And again, if you see yourself cruising down towards that 10,000 feet, you've got to remind yourself that you can't go below that. Otherwise, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. And that's
Mm.
probably the thing they take the most seriously when you're doing air combat. Everything else is pretty much fair game, but just don't break the hard deck, because
Yes.
what you're trying to do is slow down as much as you can and turn in. It's like cornering. You're trying to take the tightest turn through the apex of a centrifugal turn, so
Hmm.
you can get eyes on the other guy. So if he doesn't turn as well as you do, you're going to effectively catch up on him and therefore get
And,
a shot.
and does some of that get affected by like the human physicality of it? So being able to personally withstand the G-force as well?
A little bit. So I suppose the ideal fighter pilot would be kind of 5'2" and stocky, because the minute you start pulling G, all the blood wants to pool down into your feet.
Okay.
So if you're tall and skinny, it's quite easy to there's a lot of real estate below the waist and below the brain for the blood to pool away from your head.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas if you're short and stocky, there's not a lot and not as much real estate. So they tend to be able to withstand a lot more G. But
Mm.
you're wearing what they call a G suit or a G trousers, which,
Yeah.
as the aircraft starts pulling G, they inflate. So effectively, what you do is you tense your legs, all of your legs, against the G suit, which stops the blood pooling away from your brain and your upper body.
And does that become a subconscious thing that you just be able to do, or do you have to constantly keep thinking, flex your leg muscles to make sure I don't black out?
Yeah, in the early days, you will have to do it consciously. So
Mm.
you'll start feeling what you the world starts closing in on you. So if you imagine looking forward, it looks like you kind of going into a tunnel,
Hmm.
and that's when you know you're losing blood to the head. And then you think, oh bugger, I need to tense my legs up, and then the tunnel starts opening out again. And
So
then, but
fitness
once
must be a thing then.
you do need to be fit, but I used to get told off a lot because I did a lot of triathlon for the Air Force and for Great Britain at the time, and I was
Hmm.
really fit. So my heart rate was down around 32, but because you're fit, you've got big veins, so it's actually
Hmm.
easier for the blood to pool away from your head.
Okay.
So I had to be really careful, especially when snapping on G, because immediately you're losing um, blood away from the brain.
Yes, and so that's obviously I assume like the equivalent of dog fighting training, I suppose, is it?
It's exactly that. It's
Yeah,
exactly so
yeah.
that's
Uh,
the dogfighting training, where you see the other guy, you get excited, and you go from kind of 1G, which is normal, to 9G in 2 or 3 seconds.
Bloody hell! And so what you specialised in terms of low level flying and bombing, I suppose if you take low level flying to begin with, that must be again a fantastic part of your training.
It was amazing. So I mean, the Tornado bomber, the GR4, was designed right from the outset in Cold War era to kind of fly across the German plains, drop some, well, as the time, some nuclear bombs on Russia, as the kind
Hmm.
of the Russian Red Army flowed west, and then run away as quickly as humanly possible. So it was one of the few jets that could fly supersonic at low level, and I
Good
did
God!
actually get to try that on a couple of occasions.
And so for the Luddites among us, supersonic being how fast?
Oh, it depends on various stuff, but it's about 700 miles an hour.
Good God! And is that when they make that bang? When I've seen a few videos on YouTube
That's
of when
that's the
they
boom. So
yes.
I've got some good footage on my personal computer, but we were in Canada, and then kind of the north east of Canada. Um, there used to be an Air Force base there, and you kind of cruise down to 250 feet, and the two aircraft are about half a mile apart,
Hmm.
and you literally just start accelerating until you both get to the point where you're about to go supersonic, and you
Hmm.
see the wave around the aircraft start forming, like you see in kind of pictures, and you actually see it on the other aircraft more than you can. And then you feel
Yeah.
a little bit of rumbling in the aircraft as you break through the same sound barrier,
Hmm.
And then watching the other aircraft, you can see that wave go away as you pass through the air barrier, and you drop a boom, but you can just about hear the other guys, but the other aircrafts, but you can't hear your own because you're
And
ahead
all,
of it.
and all this at 250 feet. You must have to be paying attention pretty well.
Yeah, you do. I mean, it's like, again, like with racing on track days, you just look further ahead. So
Yeah.
you're effectively moving at what, 10, 11 miles a minute. So you're
Hmm.
looking kind of 11, 20, 30 miles ahead just to make sure that there's nothing there.
Wow. Good God.
And it's the same in Scotland. You can't break the same barrier in the UK over land, but we used to go up to the north of Scotland where I was based, and we'd fly
Mm.
in the valleys, and we'd try and kind of come down a valley, sneak down a valley, and then roll inverted over the peak of a ridge, and then roll
Oh,
down into the other valley, and kind of
yeah.
wave at hikers or walkers, or try and make cyclists jump off their bike as we were doing it. I'm not sure that was
Where would
strictly.
you take off from to go up to northern Scotland?
So we didn't know we were based there. So I was
Oh,
based in
right,
a
based over
place
there.
called Lossiemouth, which
Yes.
is it's on the Moray Firth, about halfway between Inverness and Aberdeen along the coast.
Mm. And how would you do the bomber training? Because I assume, rightly or wrongly, you don't use live ordnance to train with. It's laser of some kind, is it? Or
It's a combination. So there's various elements of it. So kind of a day-to-day training mission, you would look on the various maps of Scotland or Northern England, and you'd find something like a country home or like a mini substation that you see at the side of roads or in fields where all
mm,
the pylons converge on. And you say, okay, that's our target for today. And the systems in the aircraft will plan you out a bombing route, and you'll come through, and you've got a radar on the aircraft and all sensors, and you'd effectively fly a bombing run, a simulated bombing run using the software in the aircraft to
mm,
bomb that target, hypothetically. And
yeah.
then you'd come back and all the video recordings, and you'd see whether the weapon, the hypothetical weapon, theoretical weapon you'd used was the right one, and how it all worked.
Mm. And
So
like
that's
a commercial airline or plane, do they? I assume there's a certain amount of autopilot, or is it all the pilot in these sorts of jets?
they do have autopilot. They do have a what they call a terrain following radar as well.
Hmm.
So you can actually go into autopilot at say 250 feet above the ground if you're that way inclined, and you can do it at night. So
Oof.
I remember the first time ever being uh, going night flying, having to engage the terrain following radar, and then having to engage the autopilot and take your hand off the stick, and
And
you
let it do its
literally
thing.
and let it do its thing, and you can see on the radar that there's like a ridge line or there's some hills or something coming up, and you think, God, is it going to pull up? Is it going to? And then it does, and you're okay, okay, I'm happy now. But yeah, you're
Do you
properly
get
trusting your
attached to
life.
the planes you're sort of issued?
You kind of do. So certainly on operations, not so much day to day,
Hmm.
but when I did 4 tours in Iraq and 2 tours in Afghanistan. You kind of get used to a certain plane, so
Yeah.
it's like having your favorite car. You kind of you know what settings you like on the stereo, and you know how you like the seat, and you know how
Yeah.
it works, and you know it's like nuances that this is going to rattle or this isn't going to work, and that. So you like having the same aircraft. And the other part of it, especially on operations, if you come back alive in it, you want to fly in it again because it must be good luck.
Do you name them?
They do. A few of them are named, but they most aircraft have got their own kind of tail letters. So
Yeah.
it's AJ something or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but on ops you name them, but you normally we did a bit of the nose art on them and put some pretty ladies sitting on bombs and missiles and stuff for the second Gulf War. But that's about it.
Yeah. And I mean, going from what you've already said, I probably know the answer to this, but how hard are they to fly? I mean, I guess you've been trained to the nth degree, but what are they like?
They Depends what you're doing with them. So just if you want to go and fly straight from A to B, they're pretty
Mhm.
straightforward and they're not
Mhm.
too problematic at all. If you want to start maneuvering them hard at low level, then you've got to work it. So one of the unique features of the Tornado, both Tornadoes, is it's got variable wing sweep. So
So you
you
mean
can
the
have,
wings come in and out?
yeah, they move forward and they move backwards. So in the forward position, they're like at 25 degrees, so they're almost um, perpendicular to the airframe, which gives you the most maneuverability, but
Yeah.
you can't go particularly fast. And then you have the ability to sweep them back all the way so they're flush with the airframe.
Mhm.
And you can imagine from kind of aerodynamics that's when you can go fast. That's when, I mean, again, theoretically, you could do Mach 1.8, Mach 2 in this thing, although I never got anywhere near that. Um,
What allows you to be able to get near it? Have you got to have certain circumstances?
you do. You need to have a what you call a clean airframe, so nothing hanging off underneath. So in
Okay.
kind of a war scenario, you would have dropped your bombs, and you'd probably think about dropping your targeting pod. So
Mhm.
you reduce your drag to as little as it possibly can be, and then you've got to be lighter on fuel because you're carrying kind of 7 to 9 tons of fuel, and with
Yeah.
potentially with fuel tanks. So you get rid of those as well, and then you just go for it. You just literally put in the afterburner and just go for it. And this thing will keep on pulling. I mean, it's one of those things. Normally, it's like when you get in a really fast car and you kind of hit 160, 170, and you bottle before the car does. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
it's exactly
Is
like
there a
that.
button that says afterburner?
No, no,
Damn.
no. It's gated. So you've
Okay.
got like down the left hand side. There's two throttles, one for each engine, and
Mhm.
you push them forward and bring them back to go faster and slower. And you push them forward to a point, and there's a little gate, and you can feel the resistance.
Mhm.
Um, and then you push through the gate, and you kick in the afterburner for both engines,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you can go from there. Then you can literally just crank them all the way forward. So I think again, it's a bit like a lot of cars. Under the throttle, they have what I always call the G spot, where you push the throttle down, and then there's that button underneath it, and you press that, and it immediately kicks you down a gear, and you kind of end up flying ahead.
Yeah, and I guess at full tilt, these things are drinking fuel like there's no tomorrow.
I think, yeah, exactly like a car, you can watch the fuel gauge going down, but rather than kind of 60, 70 litres, you've got 7 tons of fuel that you're drinking through.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
one of the big things you're thinking about as you're planning a mission is, right, at what point do I need to divert to another airfield if I'm a little bit careless with the fuel or with the
yes.
throttle?
And so going on to something you just touched on, so combat. That's quite an interesting dynamic to adding to all your training and everything else. So when you went to Iraq, where were you based? What happened out there for you?
Well, the first tour would have been in kind of 2002. So
Hmm.
I would have been, what, 25, 26 years old. So very young. I was very fresh onto the squadron.
Yeah,
And we were patrolling the no-fly zone in southern Iraq because the Saddam regime had been persecuting the Marsh Arabs. And so we're out there for 4 months. Your very first mission, you kind of come in that day, you're absolutely bricking it
yeah,
because you don't know what's going to happen because they did have surface to air missiles that could shoot us down, and then
yeah.
there were tales of people being locked on by missiles and potentially shot at.
How do you know you've been locked on?
The aircraft have sensors, so and anything to kind of shoot us down at the 20,000 feet, 3.5 miles you were at, would need a radar. So we had
Yeah.
sensors that would pick up radar energy from the ground, and
Wow.
it by analyzing the frequency of the radar energy, it would tell you whether it was an air traffic radar or a missile guidance radar with some, which normally meant you had a missile coming at you. But I mean, I was lucky on that first tour. No one shot at me. Well, we don't think anyone shot at me.
Not that
We
you're aware of.
Not that I was aware. We saw a few flashes from the ground, but we think it was guns shooting at us. So, but
Yes.
the rounds got nowhere near us because you don't, having then had been shot at properly, you get a rumble as the rounds go off or the missiles go off around the aircraft.
And on that first one, so you weren't shot at. Were you involved in any actual sort of bombing runs, or what was the
We just the one. So it was self-defense effectively. So when we saw the flashes of what we thought was kind of high altitude artillery fire, we it was a night mission. We landed the aircraft. About 2 hours later, the Americans who had been flying as fighters to protect us from any enemy aircraft
Mm.
said they saw it as well. And we said,
Yeah.
right, okay, here's our list of potential targets. They've shot at us. Let's go and break some of their stuff. So there's a military target in the south of Iraq.
Yeah.
We were based in Kuwait at the time, because after 91 and the invasion of Kuwait, we still had an airbase we were allowed to use there. So we took off about 4 or 5 hours later, probably about 2 o'clock in the morning,
Hmm.
and went and destroyed a military target in the south of Iraq in retaliation for them shooting at us on patrol.
Yes. And just one step before that, how do the planes get to the Middle East? Do you have to fly them there yourself, or what happens?
Yeah, no, we do exactly that via Cyprus. So it is
Hmm.
quite weird because when you're flying in the air and you fly in the airways just like you would a civilian airliner. So we get a specific call sign, just like, for example, British Airways are called Speedbird
Okay.
when you're in the airways, and you have to file a flight pan through air traffic, and you speak to air traffickers exactly the same as a British Airways pilot would.
Mm.
Just obviously a lot cooler. Uh,
Just a little bit faster.
but no, they're not about that. At that kind of height, we're about the same speed because you have to be predictable. But they obviously can't go
Ah.
go low level and do some of the funky stuff. But no, we try to act and behave like an airliner because it means we're predictable and air
Yeah.
traffic control can look after us properly.
Yeah. And so the other three tours of Iraq sounds like you had a little bit more interaction with the opposition.
Yeah, well, the big one was the Second Gulf War, which was 2003, a year later. So I
Hmm.
was very lucky. I was on a squadron called the Dam Busters, which had
Hmm.
fame from the Second World War, and we had been selected to bring into service a bunker busting missile. So it was a super cool air launched cruise missile that would fly about 1,000 kilometers and had all kinds of fancy warheads on it to go into hardened underground bunkers and blow up um, all of their all of an enemy's key military targets.
Yeah.
So we got shipped out there under cover of darkness in the back of a Hercules of all things,
Hmm.
uh, and the missiles got taken out there separately, so we couldn't be linked with them, and the jets got taken out there separately, and we all kind of got united and waited for night one of shock and awe.
Yes.
Uh, and then I was very lucky to lead that first mission over the border with these missiles, and we got up into kind of coming up into central Iraq and released these things. And as we were flying up there, it was at night because it makes it harder for the enemy to shoot us down. You could see like a firework display going off over Baghdad as the Iraqis were the army was shooting everything they could up at potentially what was coming in against them, and all the missiles were coming in from the aircraft carriers and the submarines and everything else. So it was quite phenomenal.
Mm.
Um, and then
That's
release these missiles. So that's my little bit of claim to fame is the first to ever launch one of these missiles in anger, and
pretty
turned
good
around.
accolade.
And it was pretty good. It's in a book somewhere, I think, called Tornado Boys, which Ray Reardon was my nickname at the time, and that was I
Why
get
were
a
you
little
called
mention
Ray
in there.
Reardon?
Purely because of the snooker player. They weren't very imaginative in the Air Force, so I think there's a
There was
snooker
no
player called
Iceman.
the Vampire. No, there's no Iceman. There's no Maverick.
Oh,
It's
boring.
pretty boring. We come up with rather derogatory names, which you probably don't want mentioning on a podcast. But no, that was about it. Actually, they weren't. You had fish for a guy who could swim like a fish, and some other bits and pieces, but nothing nearly as cool as what the Americans came up with.
Did you have much interaction with the US Air Force?
It did, yeah, both in operations and in training. So the Americans, being such a big country, we used to go out to Nevada once a year
Hmm.
to go and do training there, because you can go out and fly over the deserts really low and drop live bombs for training, which is good. They
Okay.
literally create villages out of kind of the ISA containers you see on trucks and some old American tanks and bits and pieces, and create either a military facility or a small town, and put bad stuff in the town for you to kill. Uh,
Yeah.
and we do the same in Arizona, but rather than kind of doing a simulated mission like you would do in the UK, you've got £2,000 bombs underneath the aircraft, and you're doing it for real.
Yeah.
Because it was probably one of the biggest contrasts is doing. There's one thing doing it in training where you can get a little bit laissez-faire or a bit maybe overconfident, versus
Yeah.
doing it for real when potentially you've got £1,000 bomb, and if you cock it up, you can really cock it up. So it
Mm.
was great to be able to do that in training, to get as close to the same kind of feelings and fear that you get when you're out there on a real mission.
And the feeling of being shot at whilst you're flying, do you kind of grade it like, oh, it feels like it's picked up a surface to air missile, or it feels like someone's taking pot shots, and then you're not so worried? Is that sort of logic you sort of get through it with?
You do. So yeah, exactly that. So the pot shots, which is what they used to do is put kind of a barometer in a shell.
Hmm.
So the shell would go off at a certain height, and then you can't. There's no sensor going to tell you that's coming. You just kind of see a puff of smoke
Hmm.
somewhere within a couple of miles of the aircraft, because it's all bright blue up there. And you think, okay, someone's taking a pot shot at me, and you just report it to. I remember we were doing one mission over Basra in the south of Iraq. It was in a
Mm.
thunderstorm, and you don't want to be in a thunderstorm at any time in any aircraft. It's horrendous, right next to the Iranian border. And I think they called it the Bath Party Last Stand, because
Right.
the Bath Party in Basra had holed up in this building and were taking sniper shots at the troops that were trying to take Basra for the coalition.
Hmm.
And we were tasked to put a bomb through the roof of this building and take out all the Bath Party. But we're in a thunderstorm, and there was a mighty crack and rumble. And was that a lightning strike, or was that an actual surface to air missile? Because our sensors were going haywire, and we
Yeah.
couldn't figure out whether it was surface to air missiles trying to shoot us down, or just the thunder and the lightning from the thunderstorm.
Mm.
But the rest of it, I nearly ended up in Iran, which I was getting Iranian air traffic control telling us they were launching fighters against us,
God.
which concentrated the mind. Um,
Hmm.
And then to make it even worse, we got given incorrect coordinates by one of our coalition brothers on the ground, because they just misread the coordinates they'd been given for this building. So we had to go and do another pass. And then while we were doing that second pass, an American F-18 that was on one of the carriers in the Gulf came in and did the damage for us. So we didn't quite get the glory for that one, but that was probably the second scariest experience while out there.
Yeah. What was the first most scariest experience then?
Well, the first, we were doing a mission up near um, Baghdad itself, just after what they called the super missile engagement zone had been taken down,
Hmm.
and a missile. We think pretty sure it was a missile, went off about quarter of a mile in front of the aircraft, and some of the debris from the missile warhead went down one of the engines, and
Christ.
we lost that engine. So we all of a sudden, you've got fuel, you've got some bombs on. Did we have bombs on? I think we had one bomb on. We'd already dropped one, but without two engines in the kind of heat you've got in Iraq, you have to descend. So
Hmm.
we had to go from Baghdad all the way back down to Kuwait, which is the best part of 500 or 600 miles, on one engine, and descend to 10,000 feet, which is the heart of all of kind of the heat-seeking missile regime.
Okay, yeah.
And that really concentrated the mind, because we're thinking, okay, we've got one engine, we've not got that much fuel, we had to get rid of our fuel tanks and everything else, and really struggled to get back. But we did it. We got there back. We got back safely. But we you have to divert around any kind of military installation or built up area where there might be some heat-seeking missiles on the ground.
Hmm. And you must have a few of those occasions where you, like in a car, you hop out and you have a quick look around, see if there's any damage. Did you have any of those?
Yeah, we did. The engine was damaged, and what had happened was there's a load of fragments of steel. Have got the little turbine blades had really taken a bashing on that one.
Hmm.
But otherwise, no, we were really lucky. We didn't have holes in the airframe very much at all.
Very
Most of
much.
it was very. Yeah, there are a few bits and pieces, but a lot of the time you can't figure out whether it's a bird taking off or landing, or whether it's an actual um, bit of fragmentation that's hit the aircraft.
Hmm. And how did you obviously mentioned you did a couple of tours to Afghanistan? How did it how was it different?
It was a very different type of warfare in Afghanistan. In Iraq was good in the sense that there was baddies and there was goodies, and the baddies looked like baddies and the goodies looked like goodies.
Yeah.
In Afghanistan, it was completely different. So we were having to use our targeting pods, and you zoom in an area where the army on the ground were telling you they were taking fire, and
Mm.
everyone would look the same. So, because the Taliban were literally dressed like the local civilian population,
Yeah.
but they just have an AK-47 or a rocket-propelled grenade beneath their dress,
Mm.
uh, and then they'd whip it out and fire, and then hide it again. So, but if we didn't see them do it from 3 miles up in the sky, we weren't able to target them because of
Good
our
God.
rules of engagement. And
Of
then they
course.
got
Yeah.
very good at it. And I always took the view as, look, unless I'm 100% sure that what I'm dropping my bomb in is the baddie, I won't do it.
Mm.
So it was a different dynamic. It wasn't as dangerous because they didn't have um, radar guided surface to air missiles. So it was almost impossible for them to shoot us down.
Yeah.
But at the same time, trying to stop our guys on the ground getting shot and killed was really, really tough, which was massively frustrating
Mm.
because
How did you guys try and overcome that?
uh, we would we would stay away from where the fight was. So the minute the Taliban could hear aircraft in the sky, they'd
Hmm.
go to ground, or they'd go take cover because they knew you couldn't see them at that point. So we try if we heard there were some ground units on in a village or wherever, we'd try and stay a good 5, 6, 7 miles away. And we had upgraded targeting pods by this point. We'd
Mm.
use the upgraded targeting pods to see what was going on before we got within range to actually be able to drop a bomb or use our missiles.
Yeah.
And then once we'd seen the vehicle or the people that were the Taliban, and we'd identified them and we were happy, then we could come in and drop them because we'd seen them basically trying to kill friendly troops, and
Mm.
therefore it was in our rules of engagement that we could then engage them unless they were decided to go into a market square and there were kids and women around, at which point we just had to try and follow them until they were somewhere where there weren't um, civilians around.
That's a lot to think about when you're trying to fly a multi-million-dollar or pound jet and make these kind of decisions. I guess that's sort of how reasoning comes into the comparison from flying these jets to working in business, which is what obviously you do now.
It is, yeah. So in that kind of environment, the aircraft could more or less fly itself. But what you're doing is you're operating the systems, you're communicating with people on the ground, air-to-air coordination. So it's about making a decision and sticking with it. And
Mm.
that's probably the biggest lesson I learned in the military that I've not seen so much when I came out into industry, was that in the military you're trained to take all the information you've got and make the best decision you can with the information available to you and stick by it until such point you get more information or you need to change your decision.
Hmm.
Um, whereas in industry, people tend not to make a decision or have a conference about it and then kind of make a decision by committee, and therefore no one's really made a decision or stuck by it.
Yes.
And
Interesting.
I try to instill that upon the people I work with, that just use your intelligence, make a decision, and stick with it until such point that you've decided it's a good decision or a bad decision.
And you miss, well, obviously you must miss the flying.
I miss the operations. That's the bit I miss, because it's day to day. You just like come in and you do some planning and you go and take off and you go away again. But on operations, you become a proper close knit family. There's nothing to do other than to literally go to the gym, plan your mission, sleep, and then go and fly the mission, debrief the mission, repeat day in, day out. And the tempo is very high, and the stakes are very high as well. So that's the bit I enjoy, and probably why I ended up working in private equity, because you kind of get that pressure and that tempo a lot of the time.
And a lot of, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of pilots go into being commercial pilots. Was your reason for doing that it wouldn't be quite as much of a thrill, or what was your thought there?
Exactly that, and I think a lot of pilots that do that don't tend to be quite as much the fast jet pilots, because it's a different type of flying we do, and the rules have actually changed over the years. It tends to
Hmm.
be kind of the military transport pilots that do that. But secondly, for me, it was just, it would have been like flying a bus. It's like saying, Michael Schumacher, your career in Formula One's over. Do you fancy driving the number 7?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure he would have got the same response that I gave, which was no, thank you. I think I'll try something different, thank you.
And have you flown since you left?
Not myself. So I was very lucky. I was sponsored by the Air Force, and I actually had my pilot's license before I had my driver's license. So I had my private pilot's license and the various ratings. So I need to get them going again. I suppose the biggest fear I've got is that it won't be as much fun now that I've done the 6, 7, 800 mile an hour stuff. To fly around at 120 miles an hour, pottering around down to the Isle of Wight and back, won't
Mm.
quite give me that same buzz. But I've got the kids are growing up, and I think when the kids are old enough to understand what air travel is, I'll get everything current again, and probably we can fly and do a picnic on the Isle of Wight, or fly off somewhere and do a day
That's
trip.
that's pretty cool dad skill, that would be.
Well, you've got to
So
have
is
the
that
kudos,
where,
don't you?
oh, well, on that front, that must have been the best pickup line ever. What do you do for a living? Well, I fly fast
You,
jets.
you'd think it would be, but no one
Don't
believes you.
dispel this myth. Do not dispel this myth for us.
No, it is once they believe what you do. Um, the truth is there, but in the end, what we used to have to do was make up another story, like a lighthouse painter or something else, and then they
Hmm.
say, no, no, come on, what do you really do? And you say, "Well, no, I fly fast jets," but I didn't really want to say that, because you wouldn't have believed me. And then probably 7 times out of 10, you'd actually have to show them your military ID and some form of footage of you flying a jet before they believe you. Because
Brilliant.
it's such a pickup line that yeah, yeah, come on, what do you really do? No, I do. When I was kind of in my early 20s going through flying training, I was gutted. But you adapt.
And so, is that where cars came in for you? I mean, you being a fast jet pilot in the mid 90s, you must have owned a TVR at some point.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
Wasn't that standard issue for you guys?
It kind of was. Porsches were a little bit too sensible, I think, at that point. Whereas something with kind of no traction control, ridiculously big engine, and kind of you're just as likely to die flying that as you are a fast jet, was spot on. So I had a Cerbera, with
Oh,
the
good lad.
bored out 4.2, which was a ridiculous car. And
Mm.
even worse, having it in the north of Scotland, where it does pretty much nothing but rain or snow, meant that I got to enjoy it for about probably 6 weeks of the year. And
Before
the
it
rest of the,
rusted to death.
well, that was it. It lived in the garage. I
Ah.
managed. You get it out. You kind of tiptoe it out of the garage, see some blue sky, and go for it before it started raining again.
Mm.
Um,
And where did Porsches come in then?
like, Porsches didn't come until much later. It was one of those. I thought, well, everyone loves Porsches, and it's the safe bet. And I was always a little
Mm.
bit avant-garde, and I always wanted something slightly different. So it wasn't until I thought, you know what? There's got to be a very good reason why everyone gets Porsches, and why Porsches are so popular, and why Porsches are always at the Nürburgring.
Mm.
And I got myself a Boxster, and that was
Okay.
probably 6, 7 years ago now,
Hmm.
and I loved it. I loved the handling. I loved the way it would accelerate. I loved the noise. I just loved everything about it. And just thought back, if you'd done this, what, 20 odd years ago, when you first got your TVR, you'd probably still be driving this, and it would have been something like a 993 turbo at that point. So it'd also be worth
Yeah.
a fortune. But I didn't, and then uh, got rid of the Boxster and looked around. So no, I need a 911. And then that's where I kind of started doing my research, and found you and RPM.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. And when was that? Is that 18 months ago now, or about a year ago?
yes, probably 18 months ago we started talking, and then we found the
Yeah.
donor car probably about the year ago.
Yes, and to explain to everyone, so Andrew bought a 997 and then has gone down the CSR route with the car. So first of all, we did all the mechanical upgrades, and I think I heard from the workshop that you just booked in for some other bits. Is that right?
It is, yes. It's getting the aero spoiler and the ducktail, and I can't wait. As well as a few of the interior bits and pieces as well. I just
Yes.
need this lockdown to finish.
Yeah, so then we can get back out and enjoy. But well, listen, that it was absolutely awesome. Such an interesting insight to the sort of the world you guys lived in, and I know you're a very busy man these days, so I really appreciate your time. And hopefully everyone finds that interesting, and everyone's keeping safe and well. And we'll obviously no doubt see you soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks a lot, Greg.